Welcome to Sustainability Now, an exploration of technologies and paradigms to shape a world that works. Designed for socially conscious entrepreneurs and individuals interested in responsible stewardship of the planet. Sustainability Now covers food, energy, housing, water, waste, health, economics, and consciousness. Welcome to your community, Sustainability Now, with your host, Mira Rubin.
Welcome, everybody, to Sustainability Now, technologies and paradigms to shape a world that works. I'm your host, Mira Rubin, and in 2014, American lawyer and activist Helen Slottje received the largest environmental prize in the world, the Goldman Environmental Prize, also known as the Green Nobel. For 10 years, Helen worked tirelessly in the face of fierce opposition from the fossil fuel industry and colleagues who called her work criminal to get fracking banned in more than 170 New York communities. She accomplished what others deemed impossible through dogged determination and visionary thinking that enabled her to challenge consensus reality and win. Helen, I am so honored to have you here with us today and so excited to be with you. Welcome, welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Mira. The work that you're doing in bringing people's stories and voices to your audience and really helping us imagine a different future is the work of our time and is invaluable. So I am just so grateful to be here and delighted to be having this discussion with you today.
Likewise. And you said, imagine a thriving future, or imagine a new future. And that's so much of what we get to talk about today, really, because you are a master of thinking outside the box and recognizing the emperor having no clothes and finding ways around this perceived reality that is actually not the truth. And so but I really, really want to get into that because it's really super exciting to me. But before we do that, I want to talk about your fracking fight, because it's earth-shattering, really, what you've done. So give us some background.
Sure. So, and the point of the story really is not so much about the actual tactics that we used here, but the achieving an impossible result, a result that consensus reality, as you put it, deemed totally impossible. And yet we did it. And so seeing and sharing these stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things is part of what I think it really inspires all of our imaginations. So just to set the stage, I was in upstate New York. I'd been there for about 10 years. I'd moved from Boston, and where I'd been a corporate lawyer. And there was all of this discussion. Fracking was coming to New York, and you'd see gas trucks around that we hadn't seen before. And there'd be road signs with an X through fracking. And it was like, what's fracking? And there'd be various community meetings you might see back in the day when people read the newspaper. And there'd be, some stories in the newspaper about this. So I went to my first gas drilling meeting, sort of town hall forum. And I really I was just there to learn. But what I saw was horrifying. And there were pictures and discussions about what fracking looked like, what fracking did to a community. And particularly, we're talking about one of these, there's three sort of really serious water pollution events that had occurred in around 2009. One in Wyoming, one in Dimmock, Pennsylvania, and another in Weatherford, Texas. And the story out of Dimmock, Pennsylvania, where a woman's water well exploded and an entire street lost their clean water. And the community response was to basically blame the victim. I was like, oh my God, like this is just, how can this be like the best and brightest idea that we have? But everyone there, the only thing anyone was talking about was how do we regulate fracking? And we had people come in from other states where there had been fracking who wanted to help us put together model leases for fracking, wanted to help us write regulations for fracking. The big green groups came and they said, we'll help you write regulations for fracking. The landowner group said, please help us regulate fracking. The regulator, the state regulator charged with promoting the industry, said, we just need to figure out how to regulate fracking to make it safe. And no amount of regulations can make certain highly hazardous activities truly safe. So I asked, well, with some of these people I was meeting, well, how do we ban fracking? This is such a devastating impact. Like, there must be a way to say no. And everyone said, no, there's no way to say no. There's a state statute that says that only the state government can regulate the oil and gas industry. Municipalities and communities have zero say. All we can do is go to the state with our expert, regulators and figure out how to regulate this. And I didn't accept that. And so I was like, I'm going to figure out how to say no. And I was told this was really a waste of my time. I needed to focus on what was efficient, and, time was running out. We needed to work on the regulations. And I ultimately, after several months, came up with the idea that while we couldn't regulate the fracking industry at the local level, we could prohibit it entirely as a heavy industrial use using local land use laws. And that's where I ran into the serious backlash that this idea of using local government powers was not just improper, but as you mentioned, that could be criminal to try to use the town's powers in an unauthorized way. That could put, people were told, if you're on a town board and you vote for this, the industry said, we might come after you personally for personal liability because your immunity generally as a government officer doesn't extend to you doing something totally outside your governmental powers. And that really frightened people. So we developed this model and we worked really hard to get we figured we needed 2 or 3 towns to be the first ones to do this. And that then we could sort of build from there. And we were able to get towns to agree to do this, towns that were willing to stand up. And then that sort of shifted once and it was really hard. It's like the 80-20 rule, like 80% of the effort went into getting 20% of the towns, the first 20% to move the needle. And thereafter, we ultimately were successful in the court fights that, we had one of the world's billionaires on the other side of our lawsuit, the American, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the American Petroleum Institute. We had the most powerful interests aligned against us, and we won. And ultimately now there's a statewide ban on fracking in New York, and it's a complete flip-flop. It went from fracking's coming, there's nothing anyone can do, it is impossible, if not criminal, to try to stop it, to now there's no fracking. And if I had stayed in the box, if I had stayed in the pathway, in the path of least resistance, we would have fracking in New York today. And that would have just seemed like, well, of course, that's reality. There was nothing anyone could do. It just rolled out. It was unavoidable. Yes, mistakes were made, but we did the best we could. And instead, we have just a totally different, it's like we jumped the tracks and we went from one path to a totally different path. And that can be done in so many other cases. What looks like reality, what looks like something that cannot be changed, is in fact just our thinking, and it's not real. And the fact that, and the idea that there was nothing that local governments could do was an idea, a powerfully disempowering idea, and not true. And there's so much that we think about where we feel disempowered and that we can't make a difference and that we're on a train track and we can't get off. And we just gotta, if it's going over the cliff, like I hope I was comfortable, in my first class seat as it crashed into the sea, like you can get off that train. And that's really the message that I'm excited to share with people is how you can, in fact, look at this from this more holistic, different view and achieve what seem like miracles, but are really just a shift in thinking.
You are singing my song, because it really does come down to a shift in thinking. With sustainability now, we have all different pillars of sustainability that we're addressing, one of which is consciousness. And that's really, really where it starts, is to be able to shift that paradigm, to shift, to create a reframe about possibility. And so that's what you're doing. And if we don't do that, we are going to go off the cliff. There are so many areas. Do you have your sights on any other areas here specifically?
So, not on the fracking fight. What I decided, so sort of in part of the way that I think and how I came up with the idea of using these local laws is sort of what is the biggest lever that I have at my disposal at any time to be sort of, it sounds trite, but truly to be the change that I want to see in the world. And so I was able to make the change in New York on fracking, but after looking back and thinking about, well, what was the difference that made the difference? Why did we win there? And what is the single most important lesson that I can share with people? And I don't think it's the tactics of how to go out and how to community empowerment is very important. But the larger idea of empowering individuals to stand up, to break away from consensus thinking that is simply wrong. It is as if we are in a time that I believe is no different than when we thought the earth was flat. And we had boundaries on our thinking, and we didn't go too far because we thought if we went over the equator, if the North Star disappeared, that we would fall into the abyss. And people were afraid of that. And we have these thinking now. Well, the fact of the matter is everything's connected. Everything works together. Everything is a single whole. We're on a blue marble spinning through space at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and we don't notice or feel any of it. There are flowers that like bloom solely for the benefit of like a teeny little frog that sits in their shadow. Like the world is this beautiful interconnected whole, and we cannot go and shift and move this piece and that. It's not linear. It's not Newtonian. And helping people make this consciousness shift from limited, I think fracking is a fractal, that our fragmented, segmented thinking of A influences B. And there's a linear line and there's a pathway, and we know how to get from A to B. That thinking is just, it's limited. And this bigger picture thinking, this understanding and operating first and foremost, before I go out and try to change anything in the world that seems wrong to me, to come from a grounded place of truly feeling connected to everything. And then I act, and then a person acts, is much more important than what that action is, if the action is not taken from this grounded, centered, connected place. So working with people to make that shift, I believe, is the highest value work that I can do. And so that's why, and I think sharing that message, the message you're sharing, this is what's so important for people to see that the map is incorrect. We're basically operating on a 2D flat map, and we live in a complex, multidimensional world where the map, it's not accurate, and we need a new map. And you're helping to people just to see that the map is wrong is a huge break and a shift for people. And it seems like a small thing, but it changes everything. And that's 100%. What, like, really focusing on what changes everything. And, Naomi Klein wrote a book about, like, that is the question of our day. Like, how do we truly operate in a manner that supports the unfolding of life that's been going on this planet for, billions of years, like, without making such dramatic changes that the planet no longer supports life. So trying to make decisions and operating in a supportive, holistic way, that's where my focus is.
You're talking about a consciousness evolution and revolution, really. Yeah, reinvention. Yeah.
it is the work of our time.
I agree 100%. Question the underlying assumptions. So we get, but the thing is that we're like fish in water. We don't see the influence around us. So trying to see things anew is a huge challenge. I would be doing a disservice to our audience, even though the tactics aren't the message. I would be doing a disservice to our audience if we didn't go and actually visit some of the details of this fracking miracle that you created, and also to understand, is it something that can be templated to be utilized in other communities, etc. So indulge us, would you please? Just
so, yeah. So this tactic is very difficult to deploy against fracking per se in most communities in the United States, because the laws that were favorable in New York do not exist as a matter of statute or constitutional law in any other state. There were states that had this opportunity at the time we did in New York, and after our New York victory, industry went to those states and with bipartisan support changed the laws to close off this option for those communities. But as a general matter, there is a lot of power, I believe, at the local level. So there are areas now that are exempt, many pipelines and compressor stations and really big energy facilities often have wholesale exemptions from local control. But that does not mean that getting organized and being involved in your community is not one of the best things that you can do. So what we did in New York, rather than trying to have a whole bunch of people all across the state focus on trying to intervene in either a federal or state level regulatory process I believe is really designed to wear you out and make you think you participated, you had your day, and you lost, and it's sour grapes to continue to complain about that. We focused people in their local communities and said, go out. The first step, the very first step that we did was community education. And so we would go out and give presentations explaining our theory and how it worked to community groups, to town boards, basically anywhere anybody would listen to us, because education and having this vision, having the imagination, knowing there was an option was the first piece. And we really only needed to get 2 or 3, maybe 5, but any larger group than that core group was really too big to adequately manage. So we didn't need a ton of people. So we'd have a small group in each town, and they would our strategy was to conduct petitioning efforts, which was really a door-to-door educational drive in communities. So these groups would develop educational materials, had a petition, and would go and with 2 people, most people didn't want to do this alone, they'd go out in groups of 2. And people were really nervous about doing this, but it turned out they loved it because they got to make a lot of great connections. But they would go and just day after day after day, knock on people's doors, ask them if they knew about fracking, ask them if they wanted to learn about a way that the community could control it and say no to it, and did they want to sign a petition that they would like their town board to explore and pass a fracking ban. And we thought, everybody said we were the vocal minority, really the silent big majority wanted fracking, and we were just a bunch of troublemakers. When we went out and did this petitioning, it showed people how broad the support for community control was. And we would get, our target in each community was to get as many signatures on the petition in support of the ban as got somebody elected to the relevant board in the last election. So maybe the town had 6,000 people, but only 3,000 people voted, and you needed 1,200 votes to win. So that would be our target, which say go out and try to get 1,200. That's a meaningful number to people. That's like, if this many people turned out at the next election, you would lose. And that got to people. And the town boards, as it turned out, even if they wanted to do this, they really felt, one of the interesting things when I was talking with a town supervisor about how to make change, how to get a town, he's like, you think we're up here telling you what we're going to do. He's like, we react to what you tell us to do. And it's basically like the leader follows the people. And, Gandhi's talked about that. And he was the power when you're facing an angry mob of your citizens, like you will do what they want you to do to avoid, so we would tell people, we'd have people go to meetings and keep showing up and keep showing up and keep showing up. And this spread like wildfire. So we had this strategy, and then they'd pressure the town board to bring us in to give the town board an educational presentation. The town board would vote, then would work on passing the law and like all the work that went into passing those local laws. But part of what we did, so the education is the imagination. We then gave people a tool. We developed a map with the help of a GIS group and Frack Tracker. They developed, it turned into Frack Tracker, it was an individual to start, but a map that showed where are the movements. So we took all the towns, and they were all in gray to start. And then there was, green if the town had a ban, or red if the town had a ban, green if they were doing petitioning efforts, yellow if they had a moratorium in place. And we posted this map on the internet, and people wanted to call up excitedly, turn our town yellow, we've started a petitioning drive, turn our town green, we're doing this, and it was a way for people to really see the progress. And the message we had was, we don't need every town. We won't win every town. This is only for towns and people that want this. Like if you want to embrace fracking, you can, but we just need to create a checkerboard because industries told us they want to roll out like a steamroller. If we can put blocks in their way, that will be sufficient. We don't need every town. We just need a lot of towns. And especially after the first towns went and got sued, we didn't want the question to be a purely legal one about whether towns could do this. Because again, consensus reality, the more towns, the more people that did this and normalized this, the harder it was going to be for the court by the time the cases wound through after years and years to the highest court, which it was 2010, the first was when the suit started, and the final decisions weren't until 2015.
Wow.
So we wanted to pass as many bans as we could to normalize this activity. So especially in upstate New York, many of the boards are all white men and conservative white men. And if we had a whole bunch of conservative white men in town boards taking this radical action, then it wasn't radical anymore. It was normal. And so we sort of shifted consensus reality to make what we wanted the norm. And it really, and so that sort of higher level picture of the tactics, I think working at the community, they used to call it rural sociology. And when the USDA would want to change how farmers farmed, they didn't go to every farmer. They didn't try to get and I think that's a trap we fall into. Well, we need to get everybody on board before we start. And we can't begin to shift the boat until everybody agrees. All that does is empower the truly radicalized. And instead, what the USDA would do is go to the biggest farmer in town or the second biggest farmer in town and get him or her, but usually him, to switch. And then it's called mimemic desire. All the other farmers would be like, hey, what's Farmer Joe doing over there? He's doing something different. Like, I want what Farmer Joe has. And then they didn't have to sell it at all. Our desires come from what is reflected, what seems to be desirable to other people. And so we tapped into that and that whole theory of sort of how do you get people to want to change by making it seem like the thing the cool kid has, not by selling it as less than, or, well, we're going down this very dreary path and it's going to be a lot of work. It was like, no, this is what all the cool kids are doing. And I think that framework is a template that can be replicated.
So a couple things, because I just want clarification. It's brilliant, first of all, but let's look at some of the details. You said that it's not legal for a local municipality to regulate fracking. So this is where this was radical. Did the bans that you were getting passed, were they directed directly at fracking, or was it industrial facilities in a local environment? So was it fracking specific, or was it not?
It generally, our model was not. We identified the negative externalities from fracking. We didn't hate fracking because it was fracking. What did we hate about it? Well, we hated the air pollution. We hated the water pollution. We hated the truck trips. We hated the negative impacts, noise impacts. So we defined sort of what the impacts were, called that high impact heavy industrial use was the term we used, and said what we're banning is high impact heavy industrial use. And we have local government powers to regulate land use. Not all towns or municipalities have zoning, but those that do, historically, the way zoning works is you say, here's a residential zone, here's a commercial zone, here's the industrial zone, and we would separate the uses so that the heavy industrial use wasn't in the residential zone. So we said, that's all we're doing. We're saying, and it might have been in some towns, like you can only frack in the heavy industrial zone. We didn't actually have anybody do that, but that was an option to say, you got to put it over there with all with the mines and the quarries and the cement factory and the paper mill. Like, you got to go do your dirty business, even though it's all connected, over in that area of town, not next to the school, not next to the hospital, not 200 feet from somebody's front door, not next to a water supply. Like, this is not an appropriate activity to do anywhere and everywhere. And so that was how we defined it. So then we weren't regulating the industry, we were regulating land use in a very traditional, highly respected, highly built into our system of, no, just because if I owned 70 acres and I leased to Walmart in the middle of my residential zone, the fact that I signed a lease with Walmart doesn't mean Walmart gets to build its Walmart. Like, they have to go through zoning. And if they gave me a bunch of money to sign a lease and it turns out that was a bad idea and they couldn't get the permits, that's on Walmart. And that's just sort of real estate 101. And so we were trying to take this very understandable concept and say, why doesn't that apply to fracking?
And that in itself is brilliant, because you were not attacking the industry itself, which is not able to be regulated, as you said, on a local level, but you were preserving the integrity of the community. And now you mentioned earlier that laws were passed to close that loophole. What kinds of laws were passed to close that?
So, say in Pennsylvania, which already had very expansive laws that allowed fracking almost everywhere, they went so far as to pass a law that said that no local control on where fracking was located was permissible, that you could not have setback requirements from schools or hospitals or residences, that was entirely a matter for the state. And they also went on to say that, like, doctors couldn't discuss the negative health impacts of, fracking, and but just a really onerous law that, sort of Pennsylvania couldn't pass that law fast enough in response to what happened in New York. In other states, Texas Texas very much tends to allow fracking wherever you want, although Rex Tillerson, who was then a big fossil fuel executive, didn't want it in his backyard and made sure it didn't happen there. Texas went on to say, very similarly, we used to allow some, not complete, local control over where fracking might be located. No longer. We're going to take away all powers from communities. They had similar initiatives in Oklahoma, California, and Colorado. And again, these were bipartisan efforts to eliminate the ability of local communities to have to use this idea of applying land use laws to fracking. So they would pass statewide laws saying that when we said that local governments can't regulate fracking, because that is there's an International Oil and Gas Commission, and they had sort of model laws that they, just the way we have sort of model state laws for a whole bunch of things, they had model state laws for oil and gas regulation written by the oil and gas industry.
Of course.
And these would all say, local governments don't have the ability to regulate the industry, period. And so they effectively went in many of these states and added semicolon, and this includes land use laws, closing the loophole.
So local municipalities don't have rights to establish land use laws
that apply to the oil and gas industry in many states. They have taken that local power away and said, this is so important. It's so important that we have as much fossil fuel extraction as we possibly can. This is such an unmitigated great thing that we don't want to have any restrictions imposed by anyone other than the state or the federal government on how this happens. We want to completely disempower the people from being able to influence what happens in their communities. And it's sold in the name of energy independence and freedom and efficient regulation and not being NIMBYs and not in my backyard. It's just wrapped up basically in the American flag. And it is the most disempowering and in my opinion, undemocratic laws that you could pass. But they're sold, with this twist of it's energy independence. I don't even know what energy independence is.
This may be a ridiculous question, but how do we challenge those laws?
So, that's real. So at the end of the day, I talked about how the town councilman explained not wanting to face an angry mob of citizens demanding their right. This really comes down to what people are willing to bear. And we ran into, plenty of people who said, yeah, I'm outraged, but I got to take my kid to soccer practice. I'm outraged, but I might lose my job if I'm too vocal about this because I work for a company and that's not going to be seen as a professional stance. Yeah, that's really not great, but I didn't sign a gas lease, so people are disconnected from the pain here. And I was too. I didn't know anything about what it meant to live in a resource extraction colony until they came knocking on my door. And I was basically told, and this is my metaphor for it, but there's a serial killer on the loose. He's gone and murdered people all over the country. He's loose in New York, but you can't lock your door because that would be wrong. So many other people have been killed. And now who are you to lock your door, to say no? This murderer, like he's insatiable. Like you can't say no. And I was like, I'm gonna lock the door. And if he comes in my house, I'm gonna punch him in the head. Like, no, like it's not the fact that there's a serial killer on the loose and he's killed other people does not mean I have to be the next victim.
Right.
But there was this sense of like, well, this is a price we all have to pay. And who are you to say no? And these were other environmentalist groups. You have to regulate. We will be perceived as unreasonable. We will lose our seat at the regulatory table. We cannot take a radical stance here because we want to, another metaphor of mine is, we're sort of all in prison and we've got people trying to make the prison more comfortable. And I'm like, how about we break out of prison? And there are people you say like, well, you'll get 3 hots and a cot. And all right, I'll stay in prison. Because if I got to go out through the tunnel that's dirty and go live in the woods for a few weeks to figure out how to get back to reality, that's frightening. Like,
yeah,
there are no bugs here in my prison. It's nice. And I find that so frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of the other side, though, the people that are willing to embrace the dangers and the threats of the consensus. You started out with enrolling. First of all, it was you. Then you started out enrolling people in towns that had the courage to face up to the threat and the suits and whatever might befall them. So I'm wondering if maybe you could share a story or two about those people, because they're heroes in this as well, for sure.
Yes, I mean the fracking fight in New York was everybody. Like
This
none
is
of this.
how long was this fight, would you say?
So, well, it went. I mean, in many ways, there are parts of it that are still ongoing. You know, with pipelines and compressor stations and things. But the actual fracking, it started more in 07 and 2007 and 8. There were the first discussions about this. It was not really on my radar then. I got involved in 2009. The courts upholding the bans happened at the sort of late 2014. And in 2015, December of 2015, we got the statewide regulatory ban. And then we got a statewide ban passed in the budget in 2019 in New York. So 10 years on from it's coming and we're regulating it that I heard about to a statewide statutory and regulatory ban at this point. So a very long journey, and with lots and lots and lots of people showing up consistently. But what we all needed was sort of this imagination and a picture and a vision of where we were headed. And also this sense of empowerment, of feeling, when I would tell people, we're not asking for a change in law. We're not asking for anything. This is our right. And in New York, it's called home rule. You have a right to this. They're trying to take away your rights. And people, in many ways, are more willing to sort of defend what they already have, because we're loss adverse, than to like fight necessarily for something new. So we framed this in terms of like, you're not being unreasonable. You're not asking for anything. We simply want to apply very standard, regular principles, nothing new, nothing out of the box to this industry. And there's no reason why we can't do that. And that people, so tapping into this empowerment and this vision, I would always present it as a choice between a green and verdant future with wineries and clean water and education and ecotourism and everything beautiful about upstate New York. Or we could be, tremendous truck traffic, torn up roads, air pollution, water pollution. Like, it's a choice. You can't have both. And so really helping people to see their power and helping them work in their communities. And we would often be behind the scenes. We would work in towns, nobody would know we were there because we were, it was a political issue. And so the face of these were all of these people. So one of the towns that we worked with with the supervisor that I'm mentioning, we really got an inside look, here's, and this is why perspective is so important. You think what it's like to be a chairperson sitting on a town board, and what that person's perspective is, and you're powerless and they have power. And he's like, no, like I feel powerless and I can really only go where the people tell me to go. I can't just on my own say I think we should pass a law. Like you've got to push me to get there, because I don't feel this sense of agency. I'm not like a dictator. I'm doing what the people want. So you people have to come to me and push me, because that's the only way my power works. And that was eye-opening, because you sort of thought like you could either make an argument to somebody in a town, like, so the audience wasn't really the town board members. It was the town board members' constituents. Mm. And we all have that power of really connecting. And I think it's relational. Any one person, and everybody thinks my town board's the craziest. It's like, no, they're all crazy because they all reflect like all of us, which there's a lot going on with people that they don't, that they're sort of blind to. So finding allies I actually went to a bunch of, sort of activist trainings because I was a corporate lawyer. What did I know about voluntarily getting people to do anything? Like, you got a hammer and you hit people with it. So, but you think of the spectrum of allies. You don't go for the hardest person first. You start with like, who's closest to me? And that was how, and at least for me, showing up without an agenda, trying to do trying to just like, what do we want to do? How do we come together? How do we stop this? And not having some corporate agenda or trying to, fund, this, that, or the other project really helped. People want community. People want to feel connected. People want to know their neighbors. Everything that we're trying to fill with consumerism is from this lack of connection to the larger whole. And so when we were able to sort of tap into that with people, it was like tapping into like everything I think is in fractal. It was like combustion and burning things on the one hand, or like this renewable, connected energy that people gave each other. And there was a lot of, we actually spent a lot of time together. And people be like, we're preaching to the choir. I'm like, that's fine, because we need the choir to keep singing. And if we don't have these meetings, if we aren't fired up, if we don't come together and energize each other, and we're just off always working and, fighting, we will burn ourselves out. And that's what they want us to do, is to engage in some futile practice that's not going to really get us anywhere, and we'll be worn out and tired and we'll quit. And if we come together in community and we're supporting each other and we have ways of sharing our successes and truly looking at the way we envision this, even if your town couldn't get a ban and you could help people in another town, that helped you because we were all in the same boat. And so people were very supportive and cheering on everybody versus this idea that we were somehow in competition with each other.
That's a lot of staying power over a course of 10 years. That's huge. So can you say something about you were talking about the personal attacks, not only on the people that were on the boards, that maybe I was wondering if they got sued or the town got sued, but you also had a lot of personal attacks. And it was not an easy fight. This took tremendous courage and resilience. And I just want to hear a little bit about that part of the story.
So the various towns got sued. No town board members were individually sued. That was a constant threat, but that did not come to pass because I think if they had won the victories against the towns and the laws were found to not be legal, then there would have been, they were like, just wait for it. Once we win this, then we're coming after you. And it's like, well, you didn't win that. So they didn't go after people. But with us, it was my husband, David, was, sort of the first ally that I recruited in this. And he is a lawyer by training, but hadn't waved into New York when we moved there because he was done being a lawyer. So he had to take the New York bar from scratch, like sit for a 3-day exam about everything you learn in law school. By the time you're 30 years out, like you don't remember criminal law or areas where you don't practice. But he had to take the bar, so then he was a first-year lawyer. So we would go places and they would talk about how this first-year lawyer was, trying to like sell people a bill of goods, and it was, terrible lawyering. And we would actually, humor was our greatest defense. And so, Dave would get up and be like, I'm going to be the best goddamn first-year lawyer you've ever seen. But they would talk. I was not perceived as a real lawyer, because we were representing sort of this movement, and the idea was sort of first and foremost. And then we went out and sort of attracted the clients, the towns to work with. But it wasn't like a town we had the idea and went to the town, rather than, we didn't go directly to the town, but we got the people to go to the town. And that was somehow seen as that was illegitimate. Like there was an accepted way of doing things. And this was like reverse. You couldn't have the idea, get the people hopped up and have them ask for a law. You know, the respectable thing was to be a member of the Chamber of Commerce, divide up the pie, go to the town. Like that was somehow, you know, if there was an economic reason behind it, it was okay. But if you were just protecting yourself, like that was somehow radical. And they, you know, there was just withering personal attacks on our ethicalness, on our, you know, I'm Helen Slottje. One meeting, I introduced myself as Helen Holden. Like that's who, like to me, that's just kind of who I am. It came out and it was like, she's trying to disguise that she's married to David. It's like, oh my God, no. Like, but it was this, it ran for like, you know, in the negative, you know, it was like, I was a fraud and I was trying to like conceal who I was. I'm like, I think you're going to know who I am. Like, you know, and I still, even now, you know, I'll be like, I'm Helen Holden. Like it comes out, like I was that name for a long time. And so sort of silly things like that to people's emotions were really running high on this, because for many of the farmers and the large landowners, our agricultural policy completely failed them. And they've been working so hard for all their lives. Their children don't want to take over these family farms. They see no way out. And fracking looked like a lottery ticket to them. And I was sort of and my husband, we were very personal sort of faces for what was standing in the way between them and a lot of money. And so, you know, we were very careful. We had remote car starters. Like one time we came out after an event and there was it was like the car had been tased, like every electronic on it was dead. And there was pliers left on the hood. Like I don't think they did anything with the pliers, but it was kind of like, this was intentional. Someone was here. We totally fried your car. And so you're like, it's a lot of these meetings, middle of the night, out in the middle of nowhere, not necessarily friendly towns. And your car has been completely fried. And so after that, we got remote car starters, you know, we'd like have people walk out with us, would stand at a certain place, would turn the car on and like get escorted. And it was, you know, but I tried to just keep a very good sense of humor about it and, you know, hope for the best. It turned out all right, but it like the system that there's built in sort of internal and external resistance to change, because there's this real sort of almost magnetic clinging together. And if you're trying to escape or move out of the consensus reality, there's built in sort of feedback that pulls people back in, and it requires a level of fortitude to deal with that resistance. And it was not easy. I think I just had enough self-confidence, and actually, you know, I think it's a way one can use trauma and negative experiences to stand up to things. So I was like, this is not the worst thing that's ever happened to me, and I've survived worse. And I'm like, that's all you got? Like, because I've had so much worse than that. Like, that's not going to be enough. That might have been enough for, you know, somebody. But, you know, I'm kind of, you know, I would say to people, all of this negative reaction is a sign. It is a sign from the system that we're on the right track. And it's not a sign that we should give up. It's a sign that, like, success is around the corner. They wouldn't be fighting back if we weren't doing something right.
Perfect reframe. Really elegant reframe, and congratulations for your courage and the difference that you've made for so many people. Really quite remarkable. I want to ask about receiving the Goldman Prize.
Well, that was just awesome. So I had not heard of the Goldman Award, you know, even well into the fracking fight, and to be selected for that. And part of their criteria is this like courage and standing up. And I was like, I felt like an imposter you know, when they first told me, I'm like, well, I don't think I deserve it. Like what I did isn't so remarkable. And so there's 6 winners total. There's one from every one of the inhabited continents. And as part of, it's a little different now, but at the time, they would have the winners. They have a sort of week-long event in San Francisco that culminates in an award ceremony at the San Francisco Opera House. And then you fly out the very next morning to Washington, D.C., and have several days in Washington, D.C., meeting with very high-level officials from the White House and various regulatory agencies and the State Department. And then they have a ceremony in D.C., and then, sort of 10 days later, you go home. And the very first thing it was so clear with people, and the other winners, obviously, from around the world, fighting, palm oil refineries, like very different, things that they were fighting. But we were so similar at the end of the day in everything that we were doing. And every single person there, when I was like, I feel like an imposter, they're like, I feel like an imposter. And the people from the prize were like, everyone feels like an imposter. Nobody thinks that they deserve this or did anything particularly special, because these are all individuals who stood up and just went with their conscience. And so it was just amazing to be part of that group, to be selected, as one person for all of North America, as like the standard bearer for that was like me. But it was just so amazing, and just allowed me to be connected with so many different people from around the world, fighting what seems like you're in silos, but at the base they're all the same fight. And it's all about people being empowered. Everything's connected, and not acting in these short-term, harmful, destructive ways that are not conducive to supporting life on our planet. And so it was just totally amazing. I continue, when I think about it, it's actually easy for me now. Right after I won the prize, I sort of felt like to even talk about it was like self-promotion and, somehow unseemly. And now there's kind of enough distance that it's like, yeah, I won that. It was awesome. Like could have been any number of other people that were selected, but that for whatever reason, it's me. And I'm going to embrace that and just be proud of it, rather than talking about, I think, and it's part of how the system works, rather than being like, well, it really wasn't that big a deal. I really didn't deserve it. It wasn't so great. It was awesome.
And it is a huge deal. So here you won a prize you didn't even know you were competing for, right? So you gained recognition, and to be able to be among that kind of company with these other people from around the world that are also obviously thinking out beyond consensus reality. Really super powerful. Remarkable.
So just amazing. And anybody, when you meet these people, you see anyone, whatever your circumstances are, no matter what adversity you're facing, how limited you think your resources are, when we started with this, we had no resources. We were taking on the oil and gas industry, and we actually I was like, that could be a really bad thing. But you know what? I don't have to get anybody to agree to pay for this. I don't have to, I can turn that weakness into a strength. My strength is that I have no corporate sponsors. I have nobody who I have to, explain why this is reasonable or what my ROI is going to be on this pipe dream of a project. There's no funding for this kind of work. But yet that was a strength. And so you see from these stories, people without resources, and I had the benefit of an Ivy League education, but without, traditional education, that have changed the world, have stopped projects that seemed like they were just on this track. They were happening. There was no derailing them. And somebody stood up and made a difference. And we can all do that. Every single person, by who they are, what they bring to the situation, they can change this. And the more of us that change, the quicker the shift is. And so that's what continues to excite me about this so much.
I couldn't have said any of that better. It's a brilliant, brilliant way to wrap up this interview. I do want to ask you if there's one thing that I should have asked that I didn't, what might it have been?
So I think sort of at the very core, what is the most important difference that made a difference? And I think that the difference that makes the most difference is how we personally show up. And being able to regulate our own emotions and not simply be reacting and playing back some past pattern. And so the real task for all of us is this inward look first. And everything that I accomplished, everything that anybody who's ever stood up to the powers that be and prevailed comes from a place of calm and presence. And just bringing that to your family life, to your work situation, to the person at the grocery checkout counter, that is world changing in and of itself. And that's the very first step. And it's not an easy first step, but it is as bite-sized as it gets. Like figuring out how do you stay in control, stay in charge of your emotions and not run off, in some reactive mode that is not helpful to where you're trying to head.
So one of my big takeaways, or two of my big takeaways from this conversation with you, is mindfulness, presence, and holistic thinking, looking at the big picture. So bringing ourselves to center, connecting ourselves to the bigger picture, and from there allowing ourselves to see things from that place of presence. They look different. They look different from when we just routinely go through our lives from minute to minute without that sense of presencing ourselves. I don't know a better way to say it.
It truly, when you're in fear-based mode, physiologically, your vision narrows to what you need to look at to survive. And that short-term survival, limited thinking, what's important is different, what you're seeing is different. And when you're calm and your parasympathetic nervous system is engaged, you have very wide vision. You can see, now you're scanning the whole savannah. You're not looking at the tiger, you're looking at everything. And it's a whole different world. You literally see a different world from that place. And so much of us spend our time, even voluntarily, in stressed out, fear-based thinking that that's keeping us safe. We're focused on the tiger. Well, the tiger is really just a hose that's lying in front of you that's totally not dangerous, and you mistook it for a snake or whatever, but you missed the elephant charging at you from over here because you were so, it seems counterintuitive, but being calm, not being stressed, opens up and is more protective of you than the fear-based limited thinking, unless you truly are in a life or death situation. Then fine, limited vision, where's the exit? How do I get out of here? But for everyday life, we think being stressed is like a sign of like how important and good, and how much if you're not upset, you don't understand what's going on. And it's like, well, true, but then you need to calm yourself down and figure out what to do about it.
Yes. And the other thing that I got from speaking with you is the importance of asking the right questions. It's like, what am I not seeing here? What's wrong with this way of thinking? Like, how else can I think about this? And that opens up that vision as well, right?
If you don't have multiple options, you're not looking at the situation from as far back as you could.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Helen, thank you. Amazing. So you're moving into this arena of consulting, essentially, to support people in envisioning these bigger pictures, yes?
So yes.
How can people reach you?
So the best way to reach me is I'm on LinkedIn as Helen Slottje, or my email is helen@slottjelaw.com. And my last name is Slott, 2 T's, as in Tom, J-E.
And who would be your ideal client?
So I'm really looking to help founders and would-be founders, entrepreneurs, and companies really take what their vision is for being socially responsible, for contributing to a more verdant and robust future, and really doing that. Right now, so much of our environmental, social governance, what they call ESG, or diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI, or sustainable development goals, the SDGs, are these bolt-ons. And then people are surprised when they don't get the results that they wanted. Well, it wasn't built into the foundation. It wasn't part of your vision. It wasn't part of what was really motivating you. And so to help people really have that vision and build into the culture from the ground up these important, equitable ideas and visions about contributing to life, contributing to how things can and should be. And I think that used to kind of be a nice to have. I think for any company that's looking to be acquired by another company, to be a partner with a larger company, these sorts of what's your supply chain? How sustainable is it? What are your employment practices? What are you really doing? Not what do you say. So far, what you say you do has been enough. And we can see 20 years in the legal profession, at least, of talking about how we're going to have all these women partners, and there's no real movement, and in fact, less than after COVID. We're not getting the results. So how do we move? And it's because of this unseen resistance and this inability to break through. And so that's what I really want to help people with, this bigger vision, figuring out how do you have the courage, the determination, and the wherewithal to actually do what you say you're doing, and not just have it be a piece of paper that you put in a folder.
Beautiful. I can't wait to see the world that you helped to create. It's very, very exciting.
Thank you so much for having me. This has just been an amazing conversation, and I hope that for your listeners, it gives them some spark to go out and to be the change they want to be in the world.
Beautiful. Thank you. And thank you to Scott Billy, my partner in Sustainability Now, and our producer, and all of you who are the change. We get to do this together. So until next time, live your best life, love the world around you, and together we really, truly can change the world.
Thank you for listening to Sustainability Now, solutions to shape a world that works. Visit sustainabilitynow.global for resources related to today's program. And be sure to subscribe, share, and follow us on social media.